Noah! It's time to come inside! You're getting soaked.
Suction, now. We have a bleeder. Get me the clamps.
Right away, doctor. Clamps ready.
If I change this, will I still be me? That was the question whispered by an 18-year-old boy whose face had earned him the cruel nickname Zombie, just moments before he boarded a plane that could either save his life or end the only version of himself he's ever known. They say pain has many faces, but what if yours is one of them? For most of us, pain hides deep inside, invisible, tucked beneath smiles and polite answers. But for Noah, it grew outside of him, slowly, relentlessly, turning his own reflection into a reason to run, to vanish, to stop believing in kindness. He didn't choose to be different. He didn't ask for the cruel stares, the nicknames, the silence that followed every room he entered. All he ever wanted was to belong. But the world had already made up its mind. He was 12 when he lost both his parents, 14 when he stopped going to school, 16 when he stopped speaking to anyone but his sister, and 18 when a stranger with a camera found him hiding by a lake, barely holding on. What happened next wasn't magic. It wasn't a miracle. It was a series of difficult choices, quiet courage, and one powerful truth. Being seen, truly seen, is sometimes the bravest thing a person can do. This isn't a story about transformation. It's a story about identity, about grief, about what it means to live in a world that only values what it finds beautiful. And this is where our story begins. The wind carried a bitter chill across the lake. It was one of those afternoons when the sun tried to shine but couldn't quite break through the weight of gray clouds. The trees stood bare and tired, like they'd seen too much and had grown silent in protest. He was sitting there again. I had heard the rumors before I saw him. The villagers didn't call him by name. They said he lived by the water, like a ghost tied to the shoreline. Children whispered stories about the boy with the cursed face, daring each other to walk near the woods where he sometimes disappeared for days. But the man I saw wasn't a ghost. He was real, real in the way that sorrow is real, quiet, undeniable, and heavy. He sat on a log just a few feet from the lake, wrapped in an oversized hoodie. His shoulders hunched forward, arms cradling something I couldn't see. His head was bowed. I couldn't see his face, but I felt its weight, the way a wound carries silence around it like a storm. I didn't want to startle him. I simply stood there for a moment, watching, waiting. I had come here because of a message from someone in town. If you want a story that matters, find the boy at the lake. But don't expect him to talk. His name was Noah. That much I knew. He was 18, or so they guessed. He didn't have an ID, and no official record in the nearby clinics or schools. His story, like most legends, had been pieced together through fragments, some true, some twisted. People said he was born normal, whatever that means. But something changed when he was little, a growth, a disease, a curse, some dared to say, and as his face changed, so did everything else. The world stopped looking at Noah like a person. They looked at him like a warning. I took a step closer. The dry leaves cracked beneath my boots. He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see the edge of his jaw, half covered in rough fabric. There was a scar that ran down his neck like a bolt of lightning. "Noah?" I asked gently. He didn't answer, but he didn't run. That was enough. I sat a few feet away, not speaking, just breathing. Sometimes that's all someone needs. Not words, not questions, just presence. A witness. Minutes passed. The lake rippled quietly. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called out. Still, he didn't speak, but then he moved. Slowly he reached into his backpack and pulled out a notebook, worn, water-stained, edges curled. He opened it to a page filled with sketches, faces, dozens of them, all different, all beautiful. None of them looked like him. He stared at them for a while, as if trying to remember something he'd never seen. And then he spoke, so quietly, I almost missed it. Do you think, if I looked like them, people would still laugh? His voice cracked on the last word. I turned to face him fully. He was still hidden under his hood, but I could see the pain in his posture, the kind that didn't come from bone or skin, but from years of being erased. No, I said. I don't think they'd laugh. But even if they did, it wouldn't matter. He didn't reply. But I saw his fingers tighten around the notebook. There was a long silence. Then slowly he turned a page. This one wasn't filled with drawings. It was blank. He slid the book toward me, just a few inches. Write it, he said. If you really want the story, write it here. He was 4 years old when the first bump appeared. It wasn't frightening, not at first. It looked like a tiny blister, tucked harmlessly on the inside of his lower lip. His mother, Maria, thought maybe it was from a scratch, or perhaps an allergic reaction to one of the wild fruits Noah liked to sneak behind the house. She gave him a teaspoon of honey and told him it would heal on its own. But it didn't. Weeks passed. The bump stayed. Then it grew, so slowly that no one really noticed. A few millimeters here, another there. It never bled. It never hurt, so it never seemed urgent. Their home was small, a 2-room wooden house at the edge of a rural village, tucked deep between stretches of hills and thick woods. Maria was a craftswoman, braiding baskets and selling herbal remedies in the market. Her husband Thomas worked the land, waking before dawn to tend to their little patch of soil. They weren't rich, but there was love in the house, warmth in the laughter between siblings, in the way Thomas kissed Maria's forehead after long days. Noah was the youngest of 2. His sister Lydia was 6 years older, curious, bold, and always getting into some sort of harmless mischief. She loved him fiercely, braided his hair when he let her, stood up for him when boys teased, and shared the last piece of fruit from the tree. Life was simple, not perfect, but theirs. And then, little by little, things began to shift. At age 5, Noah's speech started to slur. He stumbled over sounds, especially ones requiring the lower lip. His smile became lopsided. Maria noticed, of course. But when she brought it up to Thomas, he shrugged. Kids grow funny. It'll pass, he said. Still, the unease lingered. One night, Maria opened a medical booklet she kept buried in the kitchen drawer, passed down from her own mother. It spoke of rare growths, tumors, deformities, but the language was heavy, confusing, meant for people with degrees and sterile coats. They didn't have health insurance. The nearest clinic was 25 miles away, and appointments were booked for months. They didn't own a car. Every visit meant borrowing, begging, or walking for hours. So they waited. Another year passed. By the time Noah was 6, the lump had become a visible bulge on his lower face. Subtle at first, enough to draw curiosity. Children began to stare longer. Neighbors exchanged glances. Strangers in the market whispered. Maria began keeping him at home more often. He didn't seem to mind. He liked to draw and sit by the window. He was gentle, quiet, sensitive. One evening, while brushing his teeth, he paused and stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. He touched his cheek. "Mama?" he asked. "Am I changing?" Maria froze. She knelt beside him, brushing a curl from his forehead. "You're growing," she said softly. "That's what happens to boys. But not Lydia," he whispered. "She grows prettier." Maria felt her heart shatter. The next morning, she wrapped a scarf around his neck and made the long walk to the village clinic. She didn't care about appointments. She didn't care about being told to wait. But they told her to wait anyway. 3 hours in the cold, Noah's fingers turning red as he clung to her hand. Finally, a nurse came out and looked at Noah. Then she looked away. They were sent home with a paper recommending further evaluation at a regional hospital, which was 2 cities away. Maria folded the paper neatly and slid it into her apron pocket. That night, she made soup with the last of the lentils, kissed both children goodnight, and promised herself she would find a way. But promises are fragile things when life gets hard. Between bills and back pain, Thomas's hours were extended at the farm. Lydia got sick with the flu. The money Maria saved was spent on medicine. The trip to the regional hospital was pushed, then forgotten, then remembered with guilt. By the time Noah turned 7, the tumor had reshaped the lower half of his face. He couldn't pronounce certain letters. Smiling became difficult. Eating was slower, sometimes painful. School became a battlefield. The first day of second grade, a boy screamed when Noah walked in the room. The teacher, unsure of how to respond, asked Noah to sit at the back, away from the group. That night, Maria sat outside alone. She looked up at the stars and whispered a prayer to whatever power might be listening. Please, just take us back, before all this. A week later, she stopped sending him to school. Lydia brought home his assignments. Sometimes she read to him. Other times, he just stared out the window. Drawing, always faces, never his own. One day, Noah showed Maria a sketchbook page. Mama, look, he said. This is who I'd be, if I could choose. It was the face of a boy with bright eyes, a strong jaw, and a wide, radiant smile. Maria cried in the bathroom that night, quietly, bitterly, because the world wasn't fair, because the system wasn't kind, because no one ever told her that something small could become something irreversible. In her mind, she heard her own mother's voice, health is a gift, mija, but knowing when to act, that's a responsibility. She hadn't acted. Not fast enough. And now, Noah was disappearing into himself. Noah never went back to school that year. Maria tried to convince him, once, twice, a third time. But each morning, when it came time to leave, he would retreat to the farthest corner of the house and stare out the window. The place that had once taught him letters and colors and curiosity had become a hallway of echoes and shame. But life in the village had its own rhythm. Children played, festivals came and went, gossip bloomed like weeds in a neglected garden. People were kind, but only to the things they understood. Noah's face was no longer something they could understand. By age 8, the swelling had spread along the lower jaw. It had hardened, pushing one side of his mouth upward, distorting his speech further. His chin now curved slightly to the left, as if pulled by an invisible string. One eye seemed to sit lower than the other. From a distance, it looked like a trick of light. Up close, it was unmistakable. The name-calling began quietly. A whisper here, a snicker there. At first, it was just the children, but children echo what they hear. One morning, Lydia overheard two parents talking near the water well. He should be kept inside, one woman said. The others are starting to get scared. It's unnatural, the other replied. Something like that. I don't know if it's safe. Lydia didn't tell Maria. She kept it to herself, like a secret infection that festered inside. In the fall, the village prepared for its annual festival, a celebration of harvest, color, and music. Noah loved it as a boy. He used to help string lanterns, tie ribbons to trees, and steal bites of candied figs when no one was looking. This year, he stayed home. Maria offered to take him. We'll go at night, when there are fewer people, but Noah shook his head. I don't want to be the reason they stop laughing. Instead, he sat by the window again, listening to the music in the distance. In his sketchbook, he drew a parade of people, happy, smiling, dancing. None of them looked like him. He didn't include himself. Later that night, Lydia returned home with flushed cheeks and glitter in her hair. She handed him a caramel-wrapped candy and whispered, "They missed you." He smiled, but only with his eyes. A few weeks later, something shifted. Eli came back. Eli was Noah's best friend, or had been once. They used to build forts, chase frogs, and share silly songs they made up while lying on the grass. But ever since Noah's face began to change, Eli had stopped visiting. No explanation, just distance. Now, Eli showed up with a soccer ball and a nervous grin. Want to play? Noah looked at him for a long time. Why now? Eli shrugged. I don't know. I guess I missed it. They kicked the ball around in silence. It wasn't like before. The rhythm was off. Eli wouldn't meet Noah's eyes. He flinched once when the ball rolled too close. After 20 minutes, Eli said he had to go. He never came back. A few days later, at the market, Maria overheard Eli's mother. I told him to stay away. That boy gives me nightmares. His face is like something from a horror story. Maria didn't react. She just turned, picked up her basket, and walked home. That night, she didn't speak during dinner. Noah didn't ask why. Winter came early that year. The trees shed their leaves like forgotten memories. Cold crept into the house through cracks they couldn't afford to fix. Maria tried to knit extra blankets, but the wool was thin. Noah spent his time drawing, always drawing. Sometimes he drew versions of himself with different faces. movie stars, cartoon heroes, strangers with strong jaws and smooth skin. Other times he drew monsters, not frightening ones, sad ones, the kind that live in caves, not because they're dangerous, but because the world refuses to look at them. Then came the school letter, a formal invitation sent by the headmaster, inviting Maria and Thomas to discuss Noah's re-entry into the school system. Maria was hopeful. Maybe they've changed. Maybe they want to help. They didn't. The meeting lasted 15 minutes. The headmaster spoke in polite, rehearsed phrases. "We understand your concerns. We recognize Noah's right to an education. However, some of the parents have expressed discomfort." Then he said the words that stayed in Maria's ears for months. It might be best, for everyone, if Noah continued his learning at home. Best for everyone. Everyone but Noah. She left the office with shaking hands. That evening she tried to explain it gently. Noah didn't respond. He just nodded once, closed his notebook, and walked into his room. Lydia found him hours later sitting in the dark, humming a tune they used to sing together. His sketchbook lay open on the floor. The page showed a boy inside a glass jar, surrounded by smiling faces. The jar was labeled, "Safe." That night Maria didn't pray. She screamed. Into her pillow, into the mattress, into the silence that had swallowed her son whole. Because her boy, her gentle, bright, beautiful boy, was being erased, one stare at a time. It happened on a Sunday. Thomas had woken early, as always. He kissed Maria's cheek, adjusted the scarf around his neck, and grabbed his worn boots from beside the door. Outside, the frost was beginning to melt under a pale sun, leaving behind patches of damp earth and brittle leaves. He never came back. By noon, a neighbor found him collapsed near the edge of the field, his face tilted skyward, eyes wide but unseeing. His heart had given out. No warning, no final words, just silence. The village doctor said it was likely a heart attack. He was strong, but the body doesn't ask permission. Maria stood beside his body, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the weather. She didn't cry at first. She didn't speak. She simply stared at her husband, the man who had built their house with his own hands, who laughed too loudly at his own jokes, who carried their daughter on his shoulders through muddy roads. Gone. The funeral was simple. Wooden box, white lilies. Lydia held Noah's hand tightly. He didn't cry either. He watched his father's face vanish beneath the earth and thought only of how still he looked. Still and small. As if the man who once towered over him had folded into something breakable. For 3 days, the house was filled with visitors. People brought bread, soup, and awkward condolences. Noah sat in a corner, sketching. On the third night, Maria collapsed. It was sudden. One moment she was standing at the stove, and the next she crumpled to the ground, her body twitching before going still. Lydia screamed. Noah froze. She was still breathing when they lifted her to the neighbor's cart. The village had no ambulance. The road to the clinic was bumpy and slow. By the time they arrived, it was too late. Maria had died from a stroke. Brought on, the doctor said, by exhaustion, grief, and untreated hypertension. She hadn't been to a doctor in years. She looked fine, someone said. She was always moving, always working. But health isn't always what you see. Sometimes it hides in silence until it steals everything. Lydia, barely 14, signed the papers with trembling hands. 2 funerals in 1 week, 2 coffins side by side. 2 people buried beneath the same patch of earth that once grew their vegetables, their flowers, their dreams. The village gathered again. Fewer words this time, more silence. Grief, after a while, becomes something people are afraid to touch. Noah stood next to Lydia during the second burial. She clutched his hand, but he didn't squeeze back. His eyes were fixed on the soil. When the service ended and the last handful of dirt was thrown, Noah walked away. He didn't go home. He wandered into the woods and didn't return until after dark. Lydia found him sitting beneath the old cedar tree where their father used to hang the hammock. She sat beside him, her face streaked with tears. "They're really gone," she whispered. Noah said nothing. After a long silence, she added, "It's just us now." He turned his head slightly, the moonlight catching the edge of his distorted cheek. "No," he said quietly. "It's just you." Lydia blinked. "What are you talking about? I'm not like you. I don't belong here. People don't see me when they look at you. But when they look at me," his voice broke, "they see a curse." Lydia started to speak, but he stood up. He walked back toward the house without another word. That night she watched him from the doorway, as he sat alone in the kitchen, tracing the rim of a cracked plate. His sketchbook lay open beside him. On the page, he had drawn 2 gravestones, between them, a small figure with no face, just a shadow. A week later, the local pastor visited. "Do you have any relatives?" he asked Lydia. She nodded. "My uncle, but he lives far away. He doesn't want us." The pastor sighed. "You're young. You can stay with someone, a family maybe." Noah. He didn't finish the sentence. Noah wasn't offered a home. He was offered pity. He was offered distance. People brought clothes, blankets, and food. No one brought themselves. Eventually, Lydia made a decision. She would go to the city to find work, maybe finish school, maybe start something new. "I'll come back," she promised. "I'll find a way to bring you." Noah didn't answer. He didn't fight her. He just waited. On the day she left, she hugged him tighter than ever before. Her tears soaked through his scarf. "You're not alone," she whispered. But as she disappeared down the road, he felt something inside him loosen. Not like a knot being untied, more like a thread being pulled. A few hours later, he packed a small bag. No goodbye, no note. He walked into the woods and disappeared. He walked for 3 days before realizing he didn't know where he was going. The woods were endless. Trees whispered in languages he didn't understand. The earth smelled of rain and rotting leaves. Every now and then, a bird startled him, its sudden flight cutting through the quiet like a blade. He didn't carry much, just a small bag with a loaf of bread, a half-filled water bottle, his sketchbook, and the photograph of his parents that Lydia had given him before she left. It was creased, fading, but it was the only proof that once there had been love. At night he slept beneath the trees, wrapping himself in his jacket, his face pressed into the cold dirt. The stars above looked close enough to touch. Sometimes he whispered to them, "Do you see them? My mother, my father." No one answered. By the 5th day, the bread was gone. His stomach ached, but hunger was something he could endure. What he couldn't escape was the feeling of invisibility, like he had already disappeared and the world was still catching up to the fact. He passed through villages where no one met his eyes. A few children pointed and laughed. One man threw a stone that hit his shoulder. Noah didn't react. He just kept walking. He spoke less and less, until words felt foreign. His thoughts became sounds, and his sounds became silence. He crossed a bridge one evening and sat at its edge, looking down at the dark water below. It wasn't deep, but it was deep enough. He imagined the cold swallowing him, the way the water would blur everything, the way it would finally quiet the noise in his head. For a long time he sat there, unmoving. Then he reached into his pocket and took out the photograph. The corners were torn. His mother's smile had faded, but her eyes were still alive. He folded it, pressed it to his lips, and whispered, "Not yet." He stood, turned away from the river, and kept walking. Days turned to weeks. He stopped counting. His clothes stiffened with dirt. His shoes tore open at the front. The scar across his cheek deepened from the sun and wind. He became something between a boy and a ghost, half here, half gone. When he reached the city, he didn't realize it at first. He just followed the noise, the distant hum of engines, the faint scent of smoke and bread, the voices rising and falling like tides. He entered through the back roads, where the buildings leaned into each other, and the air smelled of metal and rain. People rushed past him, each carrying their own invisible storms. No one looked twice. For the first time, Noah felt safe in a crowd. He wasn't the only broken thing there. He found a bench near a bus stop and sat down. He didn't have a plan, only the vague memory of Lydia's voice saying, "By the lakeside, that's where we'll be." He didn't know which lake. There were many, but he believed that if he kept moving, he'd find it. That night he slept sitting up. In the morning, a street vendor woke him. "Hey kid," the man said, "you can't sleep here." Noah mumbled an apology, stood up and walked away. He found a trash can, searched quietly, and pulled out a bruised apple. It tasted sour, but it was food. A few feet away, a little girl stared at him while holding her mother's hand. When he looked back, the mother quickly turned, pulling her away. He caught his reflection in a shop window. His face was swollen, unshaven, crusted with dirt. One eye drooped lower than the other, his jaw uneven. The skin along his neck was stretched tight, pale under the grime. He almost didn't recognize himself. He whispered, "Who are you?" His reflection didn't answer. He began to draw again. In an alley behind a grocery store, he found a cardboard box big enough to serve as shelter. There, with a pen he'd found on the street, he started sketching the faces of people he passed. Faces that didn't flinch, faces that smiled at others, faces that didn't belong to him. Drawing kept his hands from shaking. Sometimes, when he couldn't sleep, he would imagine his mother's voice. Soft, steady, "Eat, Noah, you must eat." Or his father's laughter when he lifted Lydia high above his shoulders. The sounds lived somewhere inside him, flickering like candlelight in a storm. But no memory stayed warm forever. They faded, as all lights do. One evening, while searching for food behind a bakery, a man caught him. "Hey!" the man shouted, grabbing his wrist. Noah froze. The man's eyes went wide when he saw his face. "What the hell are you?" Noah tore free and ran. He ran until his lungs burned, until the city blurred behind him. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of the lake, the same lake Lydia once mentioned. He fell to his knees at the shore, gasping, shaking, clutching his chest. The moon hung low above the water, and for the first time in months, he let himself cry. Not the quiet tears of before, loud, broken sobs that clawed their way out of his throat. It was the sound of a life unraveling. After a while, he lay back, staring at the sky. His heart slowed. His breathing evened out. He whispered, "I made it," then softer, but to what? He took out his sketchbook, turned to a blank page, and began to draw. Not faces this time, just lines, waves, trees, sky, a horizon that stretched beyond the page, a place where people didn't stare, where no one had to hide. He fell asleep with the pen still in his hand. In the morning, he woke to the sound of birds and the warmth of sunlight on his skin. He realized he wasn't dead. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something. He stood up, brushed the dirt from his jacket, and looked at his reflection in the lake. It stared back, scarred, uneven, unrecognizable, but alive. And for the first time in a long while, Noah said something to it. "I'm still here." The house was small, almost hidden behind a line of crooked fences and overgrown bushes. The paint on the door had peeled away, exposing wood beneath, weathered and splintered. A single curtain stirred behind a window, the only sign of life. Noah stood across the street, his heart pounding in his chest. His hands trembled. He didn't move. This was the address. He had checked it 3 times, tracing the letters Lydia once scribbled on the back of a receipt. Lakeside. Greenhouse. With the crooked fence, it was here. He hadn't seen her in over a year. In his mind, she was frozen in time, 14, hopeful, the last thread connecting him to anything that felt like home. A car drove by slowly, the driver glancing at him before turning away. Noah pulled his hood lower and crossed the road. He hesitated at the gate, then carefully he pushed it open. It creaked loudly. He didn't knock right away. Instead, he stood on the porch and let his fingers brush the wooden railing. His stomach churned. Part of him wanted to run, to vanish again. But then the door opened. Lydia stood there, older, taller. Her hair was longer now, pulled into a messy braid that hung over one shoulder. She was thinner, but her eyes, those wide, steady eyes, hadn't changed. She stared at him, mouth slightly open, as if the world had tilted sideways. "Noah?" His lips parted, but no sound came out. She stepped forward, reaching for his hood. "Is it really you?" He nodded once, slowly, and she pulled him into her arms. She smelled like dust and cinnamon and old cloth. She held him tightly, fingers digging into his jacket like she was afraid he might disappear again. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "I looked for you," she whispered into his shoulder. "I came back to the village. They said you were gone. I thought you were dead." He shook his head, still unable to form words. They stepped inside. The house was dim and narrow. Shoes were scattered near the door. A child's backpack leaned against the wall. The air smelled of cooking oil and detergent. It felt lived in, tight, cluttered, real. He sank into the couch as Lydia knelt in front of him. "I thought about you every day," she said, brushing his hair from his face. "Even when it hurt, even when I was angry." His eyes filled with tears. A memory surfaced, one that came without warning. They were children again. She had built a fort out of blankets and chairs, and they sat inside eating crackers and whispering stories. Lydia had drawn stars on the ceiling with glow-in-the-dark stickers and told him, "Whenever you're scared, just remember, we've already touched the sky." He wanted to tell her he remembered, that he never forgot, but all he could do was whisper, "I'm sorry." She held his hand and shook her head. "Don't be." Lydia's husband came home an hour later. He was a tall man with tired eyes and oil-stained hands, still wearing his work uniform from the garage. The moment he stepped inside, his eyes met Noah's, and he froze. The air changed, just slightly, but enough for Noah to feel it. Lydia spoke quickly. "This is my brother, Noah." Her husband didn't say anything at first. He just nodded once, then glanced toward the children playing in the next room. "You didn't tell me he was coming." "I didn't know," she said softly. "He just showed up." He looked back at Noah, then lowered his voice. "You could have called first." Noah shifted uncomfortably. He wanted to apologize, to explain, but the words tangled in his throat. Lydia noticed and squeezed his shoulder gently. "It's fine," she told her husband. "He'll stay for a while. Just until we figure things out." The man sighed. "All right." He didn't sound angry, just tired. "Dinner's almost ready." Later they sat around a small table that creaked under the weight of chipped plates. The two children, boys around 8 and 6, ate quietly, throwing curious glances at Noah. The younger one whispered something to his brother, who giggled. Lydia shot them a look, and they stopped. Noah ate slowly. The food was warm, but it sat heavy in his stomach. He could feel the eyes around him, some curious, some cautious. When Lydia's husband asked if he wanted more rice, Noah shook his head. "Thank you," he murmured. After dinner, the children went to their room, and Lydia cleared the table. Her husband leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Where's he going to sleep?" he asked quietly. Lydia hesitated. "In the storage room. It's small but warm." Her husband nodded. "Just make sure the kids don't get scared. They're young." The words cut sharper than they sounded. "Don't get scared." As if fear were something Noah carried like a scent. That night, the storage room became his world. It smelled of wood and detergent, lined with boxes, folded blankets, and old toys. There was a mattress in the corner. He lay down and stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks with his eyes. Through the thin wall he could hear the murmur of Lydia and her husband talking in the next room. "He's family," Lydia whispered. "I know," the man said, "but people talk. You know how it is. He's been through enough. So have we." Silence followed. Noah closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but the past wouldn't stay quiet. His mind drifted back to the night their parents died. The flicker of candlelight, the smell of earth, Lydia's trembling voice saying, "It's just us now." He remembered the promise she made to come back for him. She'd kept it after all, but he also felt how far apart they had drifted. She had a new life now. A husband, children, bills to pay, laughter that didn't need him. He was a guest in his own story. The next morning, he woke early. The house was still. Lydia's husband had already left for work. The boys were asleep. He walked to the small kitchen and found Lydia standing by the stove, pouring coffee into a cracked mug. "You didn't sleep," she said, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. He smiled faintly. "I'm not used to quiet." She poured him some coffee and sat beside him at the table. "I know this isn't easy," she said. "For you, or for them. I didn't mean to make trouble." "You didn't." She hesitated. "But people might stare, even here. Just don't let it get to you." He nodded. There was a long pause. "Do you remember?" Lydia asked. "When we used to build blanket forts in the living room?" He chuckled softly. "You always took the biggest pillow." She smiled. "You always fell asleep first." For a moment they were just brother and sister again. Then the kettle whistled, breaking the moment. Lydia stood, pouring more water into the pot. "We'll figure this out," she said. "One day at a time." Noah looked out the window toward the gray lake in the distance. The water shimmered faintly under the morning light. He whispered, "That's all I know how to do." Weeks passed. Noah settled into a rhythm that wasn't quite comfort, but wasn't chaos either. Each morning, he woke before sunrise. He helped Lydia pack school lunches for the boys, swept the front steps, watered the wilting plants by the windowsill. Then, when the house emptied, he retreated into himself. Sometimes, he wandered to the lake and sat for hours, sketching the movement of water, the birds that flew low, the way fog clung to the shore like a secret. Other times, he stayed in the storage room, rearranging boxes just to feel useful. He rarely spoke unless spoken to. When he did, his voice was soft and clipped, like a language forgotten and relearned through muscle memory. He had become very good at disappearing without leaving. One Wednesday afternoon, Lydia returned from work with a bag of groceries and a glimmer in her eye. "There's someone I want you to meet," she said. Noah looked up from his notebook, wary. "He's a doctor," she added quickly. "Just visiting the area. A volunteer. He works with a non-profit, helps people who can't afford care." Noah's hand tightened around his pen. Lydia softened her tone. "You don't have to decide anything. Just meet him. Please." That evening, the man arrived. He didn't look like a doctor, not in the way Noah had imagined. No white coat, no clipboard. Just jeans, a brown jacket, and a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. His name was Dr. Aaron Hale. He was in his late 30s, with a kind face and a voice that sounded like someone who'd spent years learning how to speak gently. They sat in the living room. Lydia made tea. The boys were told to stay in their room. Dr. Hale didn't stare. He didn't flinch. He simply smiled and said, "It's nice to meet you, Noah." Noah nodded. He kept his hood up. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the doctor said, "I heard you like to draw." Noah hesitated, then shrugged. "May I see one?" Noah handed him the sketchbook. Dr. Hale flipped through the pages slowly, pausing at a portrait of a woman with stars in her eyes. "She's beautiful," he said. "That's my mother," Noah replied, barely audible. The doctor nodded. "You have her eyes." It was such a simple thing to say, but Noah's throat tightened. He hadn't heard anyone speak of his mother like that in years. Dr. Hale set the book down. "I know this isn't easy," he said, "talking to strangers, especially ones who bring questions." Noah didn't answer. "So I won't ask anything right now, not unless you want me to." Lydia spoke next, her voice hesitant. "He's been through a lot. He doesn't trust easily." "He shouldn't have to," Hale replied. "Trust should be earned, not expected." Noah looked up then, just briefly. It was the first time he really saw the man's face. Steady, not pitying, not afraid. And for the first time in a long while, something in Noah stirred. A flicker, a spark, hope, maybe, or the faint memory of it. Dr. Hale returned the next day with a small medical kit and the same calm presence. Noah was hesitant but didn't resist. They sat at the kitchen table, Lydia nearby, watching quietly. The doctor spoke gently, explaining everything before he moved. A touch to the jaw, a small flashlight to check the mouth, a stethoscope against Noah's chest. Noah flinched only once, when Hale gently lifted the scarf from his neck to examine the swelling underneath. The tumor was firm, uneven, stretching down along his jawline into the soft tissue below the ear. The skin had thinned in some areas, almost translucent. Dr. Hale's face didn't change. He didn't recoil. He just nodded slightly, like he'd seen this before. "I know you're tired of people looking at you like a problem," he said, his voice quiet. "So let me say this plainly. You are not a problem, but your condition is serious." Noah's eyes dropped to the table. "I won't scare you with medical terms," Hale continued. "What you're dealing with is a craniofacial tumor, likely benign but progressive. That means it's not spreading like cancer, but it will continue growing, affecting speech, breathing, and eventually, eating." Lydia looked stricken but stayed silent. Dr. Hale leaned forward slightly. If this had been caught when it first appeared, a simple outpatient procedure could have handled it. But that window closed years ago. Noah already knew that. He didn't need a diagnosis to feel it in his own bones. Dr. Hale sighed. "Now, treatment is possible, but it's complex. Multiple surgeries, bone grafting, nerve work, reconstructive teams, the kind of care that only a few centers in the world can provide." Lydia whispered. "How much would it cost?" Hale hesitated. "In the U.S., conservatively, $300,000. And that's without complications." She blinked. "We don't even have 300. The doctor nodded, as if he'd heard that 1,000 times before. "I worked in New York for 10 years, he said. "Big hospital, shiny buildings, world-class surgeons. You'd think anyone with a real medical need could just walk in and get help." He looked at Noah. "But that's not how it works, not even close." Noah didn't speak. "I've seen people with insurance lose their homes over one emergency room visit. Others refuse treatment entirely, because the deductible alone could bury them. And then there are kids like you, falling through the cracks, invisible because they don't fit the system." He paused, letting the words settle. "In a just world this wouldn't happen. But we don't live in a just world." Noah looked up then. There was no anger in his face, only quiet resignation. Dr. Hale continued, softer now. Still, we try. There are organizations that can help. If you're willing, we can document your case, submit it to an international foundation. It's not guaranteed, but it's a door. Noah leaned back in his chair. His hands trembled slightly. I don't want pity, he murmured. This isn't pity, Hale said. It's opportunity. There was silence. Then Noah asked, what happens if I do nothing? Dr. Hale met his gaze. Then the tumor keeps growing. Your breathing will worsen. Your ability to eat, speak, will fade. You'll be in pain. A lot of it, he said it gently. No drama, no exaggeration, just the truth. Noah nodded. Let me think, he said. Dr. Hale rose and packed his kit. Of course, he replied. It's your face, your fight. But not all battles have to be fought alone. He handed Noah a card. No logo, just a name, a number, and 4 words, we see you, Noah. That night, Noah couldn't sleep. He lay on the thin mattress in the storage room, staring at the ceiling as shadows shifted with the moonlight. The doctor's words played over and over in his head like an old recording stuck on repeat. Treatment is possible. There's a way forward. But every time hope flickered, something darker snuffed it out. He imagined the surgeries, doctors hovering, scalpels slicing, strangers peeling away what little was left of his face. He imagined himself under blinding lights, exposed, judged, again, and worse. He imagined being fixed, healed, returned to the world, only to still be alone. He pressed the edge of the blanket to his mouth, breathing through the cotton, trying to slow the thoughts down. What if this was all he was ever meant to be? A shadow, a quiet thing that slipped through cracks and didn't make noise. At dawn, he sat by the lake. The water was calm. A few birds skimmed the surface, their wings like blades cutting the silence. He traced circles in the dirt beside him, thinking of nothing and everything at once. Lydia found him there. She sat without speaking. She knew better than to rush him. After a while, he said, I'm not doing it. She turned her head slowly. Doing what? The surgery. The treatment. Any of it. Her voice was careful. Why not? Because it won't matter, he said flatly. He looked out across the water. They'll still stare. I'll still feel like I don't belong. And you'll still be ashamed to introduce me. Lydia flinched. I'm not ashamed of you, no? You don't even let the boys see me without a scarf. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. He stood up. I've made it this far. Without doctors, without people. I don't need saving. She stood too, her voice rising. This isn't about saving you, Noah. This is about giving you a chance. He shook his head. A chance at what? A normal life? That's not for people like me. Lydia's eyes welled. You don't get to decide that. You don't get to throw yourself away because you think you're not worth it. I'm not throwing myself away, I'm choosing peace. No, she snapped. You're choosing fear. The words hit him harder than he expected. She took a step closer. You think you're protecting yourself, but really, you're hiding, and you've been hiding for so long you've forgotten how to live. He looked away. Lydia's voice softened. When Mom and Dad died, I made one promise, to protect you, but I can't protect someone who won't let themselves be seen. She turned and walked back toward the house. Noah remained by the lake, the wind biting at his face, his scarf loose around his neck. The morning light shimmered across the water. Still he felt cold. That evening, the house was quieter than usual. Lydia made dinner, but Noah didn't come to the table. She set a plate aside, untouched. The boys tiptoed around the house, sensing something unspoken hanging in the air, something heavy. Later, after the kids were asleep, Lydia found herself standing at the doorway of the storage room. The door was slightly open. Inside, Noah sat with his back to her, sketchbook in his lap, lines forming silently under the weight of his pencil. You used to draw with color, she said quietly. He didn't turn around. I remember you once made a whole picture of Mom's garden. Tulips, the little tomato vines. You even got the chipped red pot right. Still, no response. Lydia stepped inside. I wanted to bring you here years ago, she said. Right after I got married, I told my husband we should take you in, that you were still just a kid. Noah's pencil stopped, but we didn't have space or money, and he was scared. I was scared. She sat down slowly on the floor behind him. I thought, maybe it was better for you in the village. Familiar faces, a slower life. I told myself you'd be fine until we figured it out. He looked over his shoulder, eyes sharp. You left me. The words weren't cruel. They were just true. Lydia's throat tightened. I did, she whispered. And I live with that every day. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, worn at the edges. She handed it to him. He opened it slowly. It was a letter, one she had written years ago, never sent. Her handwriting curled with hesitation. Noah, if you're reading this, I hope you're safe. I hope someone's made you laugh today. I hope you haven't stopped drawing. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I wanted to. I just didn't know how. He read it twice before folding it back, hands shaking. I'm not angry because you were scared, he said. I'm angry because you gave up on me before anyone else did. Tears slid down Lydia's cheeks. I know, she whispered, and I've tried to make up for that every day since. But no matter what I do, it's never enough. She stood, wiping her eyes. I wanted to give you something normal, a bed, meals, quiet. But maybe what you needed wasn't normal. Maybe what you needed was someone to fight harder. She started to walk away, then paused. I'll be in your corner, Noah, whether you get surgery or not, whether you stay or leave, whether you forgive me or don't. Noah didn't answer. She closed the door gently behind her. For a long time, he just sat there holding the letter. Then he turned to a blank page in his sketchbook, and for the first time in years, he picked up a colored pencil, blue. He began to draw the lake. It was a quiet Sunday morning when he came back, the man with the camera. Noah recognized him instantly. He was older than Noah remembered, though only by months. Or maybe it was the light. Softer this time, the shadows gentler on his face. He still carried the same worn satchel, slung across his chest, and a tripod tucked under his arm. They met again at the lake. The man didn't say much at first. He simply sat on the same patch of grass as before, a respectful distance between them. The wind rustled gently through the reeds. I wasn't sure I'd find you again, the man said after a while. Noah didn't answer. I've been thinking about you, about what it means to disappear and still be seen. Noah turned his face slightly, half in shadow, half in light. I didn't ask to be seen, he murmured. I know, the man replied, but sometimes stories need to be told, even if the person in them never asked for the spotlight. He pulled out a small recording device and placed it on the ground between them. I want to tell your story, he said, but only if you let me. Noah's fingers traced a line in the dirt. What for? So people can stare from a distance instead of up close? No, the man said, so they can understand. So maybe someone out there who feels invisible, doesn't feel so alone. Noah was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, will you make me look like a victim? The man shook his head. No, I'll make you look like what you are. And what's that? The man smiled gently. A survivor. A long breath passed between them. Finally, Noah nodded once. The man reached into his bag, pulled out his camera, and set it up slowly. No sudden moves, no urgency, just patience. They filmed for hours, not in one long take, but in soft, fragmented conversations. Noah spoke with pauses. Sometimes his voice trembled, sometimes it vanished entirely. He talked about the pimple, the laughter at school, the silence that came after the funerals. He talked about the walk to the city, the hunger, the night at the river when he almost let go. And then, softly, he spoke about Lydia. She came back for me, he said, even when I thought no one would. The man listened carefully, never interrupting. He only nodded, sometimes adjusting the focus on the lens, sometimes letting the camera drift a little, as if capturing the way Noah's fingers moved while speaking. The twitch, the hesitation, the scars beyond skin. When the sun began to set, painting the lake in shades of amber and rose, the man asked one final question. If you could say something to the world, he said, what would it be? Noah didn't answer right away. Then he looked into the lens, straight and steady, the wind tugging at his scarf. Don't wait until someone's broken to see them, he said. Look closer. Sooner. Kinder. The video was uploaded 3 days later. The title was simple. His face made them look away. Until now, it started slow. A few dozen views, then a few hundred, then thousands. By the end of the week, it had crossed 2 million. People shared it across platforms. Some reposted it with captions like, "You won't believe what this boy has survived." Others stitched it into their own content. Reaction videos, commentary, praise, tears. Noah watched from the corner of the living room, Lydia's old laptop on his knees. Her boys were asleep in the other room. The volume was low, but he could hear his own voice, soft, uncertain, echoing across the screen. It felt like watching someone else. He scrolled through the comments. This broke me. How did no one help him sooner? This is what strength looks like, I cried, twice. But then, lower down, the tone shifted. Why even film this? He looks like a horror movie character. This is trauma porn. Don't give him money. Give him a mask. Noah stopped scrolling. His chest tightened. Lydia found him like that, sitting perfectly still, eyes glassy, fingers curled tight around the edge of the laptop. She walked over quietly and closed the screen. Don't read those, she said. I didn't ask to be famous, he murmured. I know. I didn't ask to be pitied. I know, she repeated, softer. He stood up suddenly and walked to the window. Outside, a car passed, headlights flashing across the glass. For a moment he saw his reflection, half lit, half lost. They don't see me, he whispered. They just see the story. Lydia stepped beside him. Then tell it on your terms. He looked at her. I'm not ready. That's okay. The next morning a message arrived. It was an email, sent to the address listed on the video's description. The subject line read, "We can help." It was from a foundation, an international group that specialized in complex medical surgeries for children and teens with rare craniofacial conditions. They had seen the video, they were moved, and they were offering more than words. They offered treatment, full coverage, flights, housing, surgery, recovery, counseling, everything. Noah read the message twice, then a third time. His hands shook. Lydia sat beside him, reading over his shoulder. They're serious, she said. This is real. He nodded, numb. They want to schedule a call, she added. With you. Noah's voice was a whisper. What do I say? She smiled, her eyes glassy. Maybe, yes, but Noah wasn't sure. The weight of it all pressed down harder than before. The world had seen him now, judged him, loved him, hated him. He wasn't sure which part felt heavier. That night he went back to the lake, alone. He sat on the same patch of earth where he had once thought about ending it all. The water moved quietly, as if it remembered everything. Noah looked up at the sky. No stars tonight, just a low-hanging cloud, soft and endless. He closed his eyes and whispered, I don't know if I'm strong enough. The lake didn't answer. But somewhere deep inside, something did. Not a roar, just a whisper. Try. For 3 days the email sat unread in Noah's inbox. He couldn't bring himself to reply. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat, steady, waiting, patient. But every time he hovered over the reply button, his hands froze. The word help felt too heavy, too final. Like it belonged to someone else. Lydia tried to be gentle. You don't have to rush, she said. Just think about it. But Noah was always thinking about it. He thought about the hospital rooms, the machines, the white lights. About the faces of people who would look at him not with disgust this time, but with pity, like he was a project to fix. He thought about failure. About what would happen if the surgery didn't work, if he woke up worse, or if he didn't wake up at all. At night, he sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker. The world moved on outside. The clatter of dishes from a nearby diner, laughter echoing from somewhere far away, the hum of a car engine. It was life continuing without him. He wasn't sure he wanted to step back into it. One evening, Lydia placed a hand on his shoulder. You deserve this, she said softly. He didn't look at her. Do I? Yes, she said. Everyone does. He shook his head slowly. You don't understand. They're doing this because they saw a video. They don't see me. They see a story that makes them feel better about themselves. Lydia frowned. So what if they do? Let them. If their guilt buys you a chance to live, take it. Noah looked up, eyes tired. You make it sound simple. It isn't, she said, but it's still a choice. He turned away, staring at his reflection in the glass. His face caught the dim light, the uneven shadows where bone had grown wrong. He traced the edge of his jaw with his fingers, feeling the thickened skin, the hardened ridge beneath, a face that didn't belong to anyone. A face the world had taught him to hide. He whispered, if I change this, will I still be me? Lydia knelt beside him. You'll still be Noah, but maybe you'll finally get to meet him again. That night he dreamed. He was back in the village, before the laughter, before the fear. He was running through tall grass, chasing Lydia as she waved a red kite. Their parents were there too, calling after them. The air was warm, the sky endless. Then the dream shifted. He was older, standing in front of a mirror. His reflection smiled, the skin smooth even. But behind the reflection, in the dark glass, something moved, something with his old face scarred and silent, reaching toward him. He woke in a sweat, breathing hard. Outside, the first light of morning bled through the curtains. Birds sang somewhere far away. He sat up, dizzy with exhaustion. The laptop still sat on the table. He opened it. The email waited. He read the last line again. "We believe in you, Noah. You are not alone." He let the words linger. Then for the first time he whispered them out loud, testing them on his tongue, as if trying to believe they were true. "I'm not alone." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if he believed it. The night before the call, Noah couldn't breathe. The air felt too thick, the room too small. He stepped outside and stood barefoot on the cold porch, the wind biting at his skin. The lake shimmered faintly in the distance, dark, quiet, endless. He whispered to it, as he always did. "Why me?" The question didn't expect an answer. It was the same one he'd been asking for years. Behind him, the door creaked open. Lydia stepped out, wrapped in a blanket. She didn't say anything. She just stood beside him. After a while she said, "You don't have to be brave all the time." He smiled faintly. "Then who am I supposed to be?" "Human," she said simply. "That's enough." They stood there in silence, listening to the waves against the rocks. The world felt suspended, like the night itself was holding its breath. Then Lydia spoke again, softer. "Do you know why I wanted you to take this chance?" He shook his head. "Because you've spent your whole life surviving, Noah, and that's not the same as living." The words hit him harder than anything Dr. Hale had said. He turned toward her, tears already gathering at the corners of his eyes. "I'm scared," he whispered. "I know. What if I come back and I'm still the same?" She smiled sadly. "Then you'll come back knowing you tried, and that's something no one can take from you." Noah looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly. He clenched them together, like holding something fragile that might slip away. "I don't want to be fixed," he said finally. "Not like that. Not for them. Not to fit into a world that never wanted me." "Then don't do it for them," Lydia said. "Do it for you. Or for the kid out there who's watching that video right now thinking he's alone. Show him he's not." Her voice cracked on the last word. And that was when something inside Noah shifted, quietly but completely. The next morning the sky was pale blue, streaked with white clouds. He sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, the cursor blinking again. Lydia stood behind him, her hands resting on his shoulders. The house smelled of coffee and soap and new beginnings. He clicked reply. His fingers hovered above the keys, then began to type. Slowly, deliberately. "Thank you for reaching out. I've thought about it a lot, I'm afraid. But maybe that's a reason to say yes. I don't know what the outcome will be. I just know I want to live. Not to be normal, but to matter. If you'll still have me, I'm ready." He read it twice, then pressed send. For a long moment, he just stared at the screen. Then he exhaled. Long and shaky, as if releasing years of breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Lydia leaned down and kissed the top of his head. "You did it," she whispered. Noah smiled faintly. "I did something," he said. "I'm not sure what yet." She squeezed his shoulders. Sometimes that's how healing starts. He looked toward the window, where sunlight broke across the lake in a silver shimmer. For the first time in years it didn't look endless. It looked like a road. The suitcase sat quietly in the corner, half-zipped, clothes folded with awkward care. Lydia had helped him pack the essentials, a change of clothes, a notebook, pencils, an envelope of documents. She kept slipping things in, a photo of their parents, a granola bar, a small bottle of eucalyptus oil in case the hospital smells weird. Noah didn't stop her, but he hadn't packed the most important thing yet. The night before his flight, he asked for silence. No phone, no guests, no questions, just space. Lydia understood. She took the boys to visit her in-laws. Noah stayed behind. He set up his sketch pad on the small table near the window. The light was perfect, golden, warm, fading slowly as the sun dipped low behind the lake. The water outside shimmered like melted glass. He stared at the blank page for a long time. Then, slowly, he began to draw. He didn't sketch his face, or the tumor, or even the hospital waiting across the ocean. He drew the village, his old one, how it had looked before the pain started. A dirt path winding past fields, a crooked tree they used to climb, a clothesline swaying like music in the wind. Then he drew Lydia. Not as she was now, but as the girl she had been. Bright-eyed, fierce, arms outstretched holding a red kite. The wind lifted the kite high above the village. It danced. And then, in the corner of the page, he drew himself. Not the boy hiding, not the young man curled by the lake, but himself, upright, scarred, watching the kite, not chasing it, just watching, accepting. He used color this time. Blues for the sky, ochre for the path, crimson for the kite, and green, vivid green, for the grass they had run through barefoot as children. When he was done, he stared at the picture for a long time. Then he signed his name, just Noah. That night, he left the sketchbook on Lydia's bed with a note folded into the back cover. For when you miss me, thank you. For coming back, don't stop flying, and he slept little. In the morning, the sun rose early and brilliant. Lydia returned just in time to take him to the airport. She looked tired, nervous. Her hands kept reaching for his without thinking. The boys were quieter than usual. The younger one, Jonah, slipped a drawing into his bag. "It's you," he said, "but with a superhero cape." Noah smiled. "That's too generous." "No," Jonah said. "It's accurate." At the gate things moved fast, too fast. Boarding passes, ID, announcements over the intercom. Lydia held his shoulders, forehead pressed to his. "You can still change your mind," she said, though her voice trembled. "I won't," Noah said softly. "I'm ready now. Even if it doesn't fix everything?" He looked at her, calm. "I'm not going to be fixed. I'm going to begin." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'll be here," she whispered. "Always." He nodded, then pulled her into a long, quiet hug. When they let go, neither spoke. He walked through security without looking back, but as he reached the terminal, he stopped beside a wide window that looked out over the runway. The plane was there, white, quiet, waiting, and the sky. The sky was full of light. Months later, the video was still circulating. But now, it ended with an update. A picture of Noah, hospital gown, IV in his arm, bandages across his cheek. He was smiling. And beside him on the nightstand was a framed copy of the painting, a red kite in the sky, a crooked village tree, a boy standing tall in the grass. Not perfect, not whole, but real. And finally seen.